The sound of my heels echoed through the marble floors of our Hamptons mansion as I carefully adjusted the last detail on the dining table. Three place settings gleamed under the chandelier light: crystal glasses, polished silverware, a centerpiece of blood-red roses. To anyone else, it looked like the perfect dinner party. But for me, it was theater. I was staging the most important performance of my life. My name is Katherine Harrison, and at 42, I was at the height of my career as Chief Marketing Officer for a Fortune 500 company. People admired me for my composure in the boardroom, my sharp mind, my ability to command respect in a world where weakness meant elimination. Those same skills that built my career were about to serve a far more personal purpose. Because tonight I wasn't simply a hostess. I was a wife who had been betrayed, and I was ready to dismantle everything my husband and his mistress thought they had built behind my back. 15 years earlier, I had walked down the aisle with James Harrison, a brilliant young medical student I met during our final year at Yale. We were both ambitious, both dreamers, both determined to change the world. We had built a life that looked flawless from the outside. Charity galas, vacation homes, magazine spreads that called us a power couple. For years, I embraced my role as his partner, the consummate hostess, the steady hand behind his rise as one of the city's top cardiac surgeons. But behind every photograph, there was me smoothing over cracks, ignoring subtle shifts, and silencing the gnawing voice inside that whispered something was wrong. That voice screamed the day I found their messages. A rainy Tuesday, James's iPad left carelessly on the sofa. I only picked it up to order him a birthday gift. What I discovered instead were text threads that shattered me. They weren't just explicit, they were intimate. Messages about secret weekends in Vermont, dreams of a future together after he left me, jokes about how clueless I was. My hands trembled as I scrolled, each line slicing deeper. But I didn't scream. I didn't confront him right then. Something inside me shifted. The raw pain crystallized into something sharper. I began collecting evidence with the same methodical precision James used in surgery and I used in my campaigns. I hired private investigators. I tracked their patterns, documented every meeting, every indulgence, every lie, and I discovered more than infidelity. I uncovered financial irregularities, questionable surgeries, backdoor pharmaceutical deals. The man who had cut open hearts for a living was cutting corners in ways that could ruin lives. 6 months later, I stood in my black Chanel dress, a gift from James, on our 10th anniversary, waiting for the doorbell to ring. The irony of wearing it tonight was not lost on me. In my pocket was a USB drive containing every piece of evidence: the affair, the fraud, the malpractice. Tonight wasn't just about betrayal. Tonight was about annihilation. The chime came precisely at 7. Through the security camera feed on my phone, I saw her, Sarah, barely 32, ambitious, impatient, dressed in a red gown, a little too tight for dinner with her lover's wife. Her expression flickered between nerves and triumph. She thought she was winning. She thought she would replace me. A few minutes later, James's BMW pulled into the drive. He had texted earlier saying he would come straight from the hospital. He didn't know that tonight's casual dinner was really a carefully laid trap. I opened the door with a warmth that made Sarah shift uncomfortably. "Sarah, darling, I'm so glad you could make it," I said, guiding her into the foyer lined with photos of James and me, 15 years of memories she would never erase. The scent of her perfume, one I had found lingering on James's shirts, curled into my nose like smoke. When James walked in, his confident surgeon stride faltered for just a moment as he saw us standing together. The color drained from his face before he forced a smile. "Honey, you didn't tell me Sarah would be joining us," he said, his voice casual, but his eyes screaming panic. I led them to the living room for cocktails. Years of practice made my hands steady as I mixed my signature Manhattans. I raised my glass with a smile sharp enough to cut glass. To new beginnings. They clinked their glasses nervously, sipping the drinks as their eyes darted toward each other when they thought I wasn't looking. Dinner was a strained performance. Every answer Sarah gave about work at the hospital was coded in nervousness. James tried to keep the conversation light, but I saw the way his tie loosened, the way her hands trembled on the stem of her glass. They knew something was wrong. They just didn't know how deep my knowledge went. After the main course, James's favorite beef Wellington, I set the wine bottle down and said, "Actually, before dessert I have a little presentation prepared." The word presentation made his fork clatter. He knew what my presentations meant. He knew they were always thorough, always airtight, always impossible to refute. With a click of the remote, the mirror on the dining room wall lit up into a screen. The first image appeared James and Sarah walking into a Vermont hotel time-stamped for the weekend he claimed to be at a medical symposium. "Interesting conference, wasn't it, darling?" I said sweetly. More images followed. Stolen kisses, hotel receipts, bank statements. My voice dripped with calm venom as I narrated their lies. Then I unveiled the real bombshell: documents of malpractice, insurance fraud, pharmaceutical kickbacks. Evidence that could dismantle not just our marriage but his entire career. Their faces turned ashen. Sarah's hand shook so violently she nearly dropped her glass. James's knuckles whitened against the table. I leaned back, savoring the moment. "You see," I said softly while you two were busy playing house, "I was building the case that will burn yours to the ground." James's jaw clenched so tight I could almost hear the enamel grind. He stared at me as if he didn't recognize the woman sitting across from him. Maybe he didn't. Maybe the Catherine he thought he knew, the one who smiled at galas, who kept the house immaculate, who made excuses for his late nights, was gone. What sat across from him now was someone forged in betrayal, honed by rage and sharpened by resolve. Sarah shifted uncomfortably, her eyes darting between us. This is insane," she stammered. "You can't just what I cut in smoothly. Expose the truth. Shine a light on what's been festering in the dark. You should know. Sarah, lies always leave a trail. And I'm very, very good at following trails." James slammed his palm against the table. "Enough!" His voice cracked with fury and fear. "Catherine, you don't know what you're doing. If you release those documents, you'll ruin me. You'll ruin us." I laughed, a hollow, bitter sound. "There is no us, James. Not anymore. And as for ruining you, you managed that all on your own. I'm just the messenger." He leaned forward, trying to summon that old charm that had once disarmed judges, patients, colleagues, me. "We can fix this," he said, his voice softening. "Don't throw away everything we've built." I met his gaze steadily. "You threw it away the moment you let her into our bed. The moment you stole from patients from the hospital from me. You didn't just betray our marriage, James. You betrayed your vows as a doctor, your integrity as a man. That isn't something you patch up with sweet words." Sarah looked stricken now, her bravado crumbling. "You never told me about any of this," she whispered, turning to James. "Kickbacks, fraud, you said? You—" "Shut up, Sarah," he barked. And in that instant I saw it, the truth she had been refusing to see. The charm she thought was hers alone was nothing but a weapon he wielded carelessly. Her face flushed with humiliation, and her eyes darted to me with something startling sympathy. For the first time she understood. I slid the USB drive across the table, its metallic surface gleaming under the chandelier. "Here's how this works," I said evenly. "Tomorrow morning, this evidence goes to the hospital board, the state medical licensing authority, and the press, unless you sign over full control of our shared assets to me. The house, the accounts, everything. You walk away with your reputation in ashes, but at least you'll still have your freedom." James's face turned crimson. "You can't blackmail me." I tilted my head, smiling faintly. "It's not blackmail when it's the truth. It's leverage. You taught me that. Remember, always know the power in the room. Well, tonight that's me." The silence that followed was suffocating. Sarah pushed her chair back, her voice trembling. "I'm not going down with you, James. If she has that evidence, she'll bury us both. I'm done." She grabbed her clutch and stumbled out, heels clacking against the marble. For a long moment, James just sat there, staring at the door she had vanished through. Then slowly he turned back to me. His eyes were bloodshot, desperate. "Catherine," he said, his voice breaking, "don't do this. Please, I'll change, I'll end it. Just don't destroy me." I felt something twist in my chest, but it wasn't pity. It was clarity. For years, I had been the one bending, forgiving, smoothing over his cracks. Tonight, I was done being his safety net. I don't want your promises, I said quietly. I want my freedom, and tomorrow I'll have it whether you sign those papers or not. He slumped back in his chair, defeated. For the first time in our 15 years together, James Harrison looked powerless, and it was beautiful. He didn't sign that night. Of course he didn't. Men like James need one more round of delusion before they accept the math. He slept in the guest room, or pretended to. I lay awake in our bed and stared at the coffered ceiling we'd chosen together, remembering the way we used to lie there whispering about names for children we never had. He'd turned those whispers into knives over the years. Later Katie not. Now the timing, the fellowship, the promotion, until the want in me curled up and went quiet. 3 years ago, when my body tried and failed to hold on to a heartbeat, he had patted my shoulder and said, "It's for the best. You're swamped with that rebrand." The words lodged in my ribs like shrapnel. I touched the place on my sternum where they still lived and felt something different there, now space where the ache had been a clearing. At dawn, I rose showered and dressed, as if for a launch, black silk blouse, tailored trousers, low heels made for walking toward an ending. Downstairs, he was at the breakfast bar with his phone eyes raw from a night of bargaining with whatever god he believed would save him. He looked up when I entered, then glanced at the leather folder in my hand. "Catherine," he began. I set the folder on the marble like a gavel. "There are copies in a safety deposit box and with counsel. If I am hit by a bus, the truth still arrives at the board, the DA, and the press. This is not a bluff." He swallowed, throat working. "You'd destroy my life." "You destroyed it," I said, not unkindly. "I'm just refusing to die in the wreckage." At 9 sharp, we were in our attorney's office. The conference room smelled of toner and quiet outrage. My lawyer, Ava, had the steady eyes of a woman who has ferried 1,000 clients across bad seas. James was flanked by a partner from his boutique firm who looked as if he'd been told there was a small kitchen fire and arrived to find the second floor already gone. Ava outlined the terms: transfer of the house and Montauk Cottage liquid accounts, my share of the investment portfolio relinquishment, of claim to my stock options, a structured payout, in lieu of alimony. She slid forward the addendum, a professional separation agreement, that required James to self-report conflicts and events that may compromise safe practice to the hospital board within 24 hours. He stared at the clause as if it were a live snake. "You want me to turn myself in?" "I want to stop pretending that the truth is optional," I said. "You'll either sign and self-report, or I'll report you and the story will be that the wife turned you in. Pick the headline you want to live under." He picked up the pen, put it down, picked it up again. His hand shook so badly, the first signature scraped across the line like a storm front. By the fourth, he steadied. Men always steady when they realize there is no alternate ending. When it was over, he pushed his chair back and put his face in his hands. For a moment, I remembered the boy on the Yale Green who had asked me to split a hot pretzel and tell him my biggest dream. To build something true, I had said then. I thought we had. How strange that the truest thing I would ever build with James was this ending. He left without meeting my eyes. Ava waited until the door clicked, then exhaled. "You did well," she said. "Now remember, he will try to renegotiate with sentiment. He will arrive at midnight with confessions. He will cry. Don't mistake moisture for repentance." On my drive home, the ocean was pewter, the sky the pale blue of a bruise turning. I turned off the highway toward the hospital because the next part of the plan was not about James. It was about me refusing to be complicit. The boardroom smelled like coffee and old binders. I handed the chair my folder and watched seasoned men and women go quiet as the pages changed their faces, kickbacks disguised as educational grants, double-billed devices, surgeries, scheduled beyond safe quotas. Somewhere down the hall, a code was called and feet pounded. The truth is always happening at the same time as someone's emergency. The chair closed the file and said very gently, "Thank you for bringing this forward." It sounded like a benediction and a warning. I stepped out into a corridor where the light fell in clean bars. Sarah was there of all impossible people, standing small in a beige coat that looked suddenly too large. She had no gloss today, no weaponry of beauty, just a face stripped of pretense. "I went to HR," she said before I could speak. I gave a statement. "And the licensing board." I. Her voice cracked. "He told me he'd lose everything if I talked. I believed that meant I would be the reason. But I think the reason is who he is." For a second, the past pressed on my throat. I could have pushed her away, could have said all the easy, sharp things. Instead, I heard myself ask, "Are you safe?" She nodded, eyes shining. "I'm moving back to my sister's. I'm sorry." She pressed something into my palm, an old-fashioned voice recorder. He left it at my place once. It picked up more than he knew. When she was gone, I stood with the small weight of it in my hand and thought of how women save each other in ways that are imperfect and late and still holy. I drove home along the curve of the coast, with the recorder in the cup holder like a quiet heart. News moves like weather in a town like ours. By evening, there were dark clouds on every screen. Cardiac chief under investigation, sources allege kickback scheme. Harrison steps aside. Pending review. The hospital issued the sentence they always do before the real one. Out of an abundance of caution. My phone pulsed with messages. Some were schadenfreude addressed as concern. Some were the kind of love that shows up with soup. My mother called and said, "Come home for the weekend. I'll make lemon chicken." I said yes like a daughter and then no like a woman not ready to leave the battlefield just yet. At midnight, a car idled in our drive. Headlights painted the foyer in moving light. I knew the footsteps on the stone. He didn't ring. He used his code and stepped into the dark. I let him get as far as the hall table before I spoke. "Your access will be revoked tomorrow." He flinched. "Katie." He looked at the walls as if the photographs might speak for him. "I reported everything. I told them I'd cooperate. Please, don't send anything else." I turned on the lamp. The small room bloomed into shape. Books, blue bowl, the silver-framed picture of us on the hospital roof the night we toasted his first successful transplant. "There's nothing else to send," I said. "Only the truth on repeat." He swayed as if with sudden seasickness. "I loved you." "I know," I said. "And then you loved yourself more." He covered his face with both hands. The sob when it came was not the sound of a man who is sorry. It was the sound of a man whose reflection has finally refused to lie. I let it pass through the house like a storm, then opened the door and stood aside. He went. The night closed behind him with the softest click like a page finished. Upstairs, I took off the Chanel and hung it with the care you give to garments you'll never wear again. Barefoot, I walked the length of the hall and opened the window at the end. Salt air surged in. Somewhere on the beach, laughter. Somewhere on the road, a siren. Somewhere inside me, a settling. I thought of that tiny heartbeat that hadn't stayed, of the rooms in my body and my home that had been waiting for a child who never came. Another life tilted forward. Then not the nursery we didn't fill, but the studio I could easels and canvases, or a piano, or nothing but a yoga mat and breath. Grief didn't leave. It just put on a softer coat and sat beside me. In the morning, I brewed coffee and took it to the terrace. The roses on last night's table had begun to open into something almost violent with color. My phone buzzed with a message from the board chair. "Dr. Harrison's privileges are suspended pending formal inquiry. Thank you for your cooperation." Another from Ava, "Recording is a nail in the coffin. Proud of you." And one more, unsigned, a number I didn't know I was a patient of his. "Thank you." I pressed the phone to my chest and let the notes stack into a chord I could finally hear. The days that followed unfolded like chapters in a book I had never intended to write. News of James's suspension broke across every major outlet. Photos of us once paraded as the perfect couple at galas were now dissected under headlines about fraud, malpractice, betrayal. My face, always poised beside his, became the unwilling emblem of a downfall. Yet instead of shame, I felt something unexpected: relief. The lies weren't mine to carry anymore. The mask had been ripped off, and all that remained was truth. I spent hours wandering through rooms that had once felt like gilded cages. Each step was a rediscovery. The kitchen no longer smelled of dinners cooked in silence. The library no longer echoed with his absences. Even the bedroom felt different, like a place where I could finally rest instead of rehearse my composure. I boxed up his belongings one evening not with tears, but with the calm precision of a woman reclaiming her space. Designer suits, cufflinks, the cologne that clung like smoke to every pillow, each piece went into storage. My house was no longer ours, it was mine. The voice recorder Sarah had given me turned out to be even more damning than I imagined. It captured conversations about falsifying patient reports, about pocketing pharmaceutical incentives, about cutting surgical corners to maximize billing hours. When Ava played the tape in her office, even she looked shaken. With this, she said they won't just suspend him, they'll indict him. Part of me wanted to stop there. Divorce, suspension, disgrace, that seemed enough. But then I thought of the patients. People who had trusted him with their lives, their hearts, their futures. People who might never know how close they came to being statistics in his pursuit of greed. And I knew then silence would make me complicit. So we turned everything over to the DA. The investigation gained momentum quickly. James's colleagues scrambled to distance themselves, lawsuits piled up, and still he tried. Late-night emails, voicemails, letters left at the gate, promises of change, threats of mutual destruction, pleas for mercy. I didn't respond. Each message was a reminder of the man he had become, or perhaps always was. Meanwhile, Sarah vanished from the public eye. She moved back to her hometown. I heard trying to stitch together the fragments of a life scorched by his lies. For all the bitterness I once held toward her, I couldn't help but hope she found peace. She too had been a pawn in James's game, and she had chosen belatedly but bravely to hand me the weapon that ended it. One night I stood on the terrace watching the tide crawl over the sand. The air was sharp with salt and change. My mother joined me, wrapping a shawl around my shoulders like she used to when I was a girl. "You look lighter," she said softly. "I feel lighter," I admitted. She studied me for a long moment, then asked, "Do you regret it?" "Any of it." I thought of the years, the laughter that had been real, once the nights of whispered dreams. "I regret who I had to become to survive him," I said. "But I don't regret surviving." The divorce finalized quietly compared to the storm that preceded it. I walked out of the courthouse with my head high, the ink on the decree fresh, but the freedom ancient in my bones. James walked out another door, flanked by lawyers, paparazzi flashing like lightning. Our paths had finally split, not just legally, but irrevocably. Months later, I filled the dining room not with evidence or betrayal, but with canvases and paints. My fingers, once curled around boardroom remotes and courtroom folders, found new rhythm in brushstrokes. The roses I had set on the table that night became my first subject, painted over and over until each petal became a hymn of resilience. And then came a letter from a patient I had never met. It read simply, "He was my surgeon. Thank you for saving people like me. You'll never know how much it matters." I pressed the paper to my heart, tears slipping quietly for the first time in months. Not tears of grief, but of release. James's story continued without me, headlines about indictments, hearings, stripped licenses. My story finally was my own. No longer tethered to his choices, I was free to make mine. So here I am sharing this with you. If you've ever sat across a table from betrayal, if you've ever felt your life unravel in one shattering discovery, know this. Endings can be beginnings dressed in sharper clothes. Betrayal can carve you hollow, but it can also carve you open to something new. If this story touched you, please like this video. Share it with someone who needs strength tonight, and subscribe for more. And tell me in the comments, what have you survived, and how did you rebuild your story? Might just be the light someone else is waiting for.